Good afternoon and welcome to the Today's Dietitian CE Learning Library webinar, Strategies for Better Sleep. Today's Dietitian is the only independent magazine written specifically for registered dietitians and nutrition professionals. We're proud to be the recognized resource for practical, reliable, and interesting information for the dietetics industry. Today's presentation is brought to you free of charge by Today's Dietitian. We look forward to the opportunity to bring you high-quality, complimentary education, and we thank you for being a supporter of our continuing education programming. Before we start the presentation, I have 2 points of housekeeping. First, in order to claim your credit, you'll have to remain with us for the entire hour-long presentation. Second, at the end of the session, our presenters will be taking questions. If you have a question, please type it in the question box in your control panel. We'll try to address as many questions as time allows. Today's presenters have the following disclosures to report. Chris Mohr, PhD, RD, has received honorarium from Pharmavite for the presentation of this topic. Kara Mohr, PhD, has no relevant disclosures to report. Both speakers certify that no conflict of interest exists for this program. Chris Mohr, PhD, RD, is an international presenter on the topic of well-being and nutrition. He's on the Men's Health Advisory Board, previously worked as the sports nutrition consultant for the Cincinnati Bengals, worked with select WWE athletes, and his expertise has allowed him the opportunity to speak at the White House, the CIA, and several of the largest Fortune 500 companies in over 10 countries and most of the 50 United States. Kara Mohr, PhD, is an internationally recognized dynamic keynote speaker who's known for her expertise and experience in the areas of behavior change, exercise, and mindset. Through teaching and coaching, Kara has worked with thousands of individuals to help them discover how to get healthier and become the best versions of themselves. Kara is co-owner of More Results, Inc., a well-being company that helps people and organizations create healthy, thriving cultures that drive performance. She has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the Pennsylvania State University and a Master of Science and a PhD in Exercise Physiology from the University of Pittsburgh. And with all that, I'm pleased to welcome my friends, Chris and Kara Mohr.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're super excited to be here and to talk about one of our favorite topics. When Leslie was making the introductions and she introduced me, one of the things she didn't tell you is that I used to refer to myself as 5-hour Kara. Now, if that sounds a little bit awkward, I totally get it. But what I used to say all the time was that I was a person who only needed 5 hours of sleep. That simply because I was able to go to bed at midnight every day and wake up at 5 a.m. without a problem. Most mornings I would wake up, my alarm would go off, I would be able to get up and go to the gym and work out. And then the rest of my day was really filled with a lot of coffee, a lot of, lack of focus, and I would be spending my entire day trying to get work done. And every single night I would come home with stacks and stacks of work to do. And Chris would look at me like, didn't you just work all day long? And so it was one of those situations where I thought that I would be fine without getting any sleep, that if I just needed 5 hours of sleep, that was, enough, because that's what my body needed and what it relied on. And then once I started reading about this topic and realized that maybe I could benefit from greater amounts of sleep, I started experimenting with how to do that. So got more sleep, got to 6 hours, got to 7 hours, and then one of those days I magically started getting consistently 8 hours of sleep. I was walking with a friend and I said, I had no idea this is what it takes and this is how you could feel as a human, because I just simply didn't know. So today it's our goal to help you learn how to sleep better. And as you can see here, we have a number of things that we'll talk about today. We'll help you better understand what happens during sleep and why it's really a matter of both quantity of sleep and quality when we're talking about getting a good night's rest. We'll also talk about what happens when you don't get enough sleep. How does that impact your health and your performance each and every day? We'll discuss the effects that caffeine, that alcohol, that technology, and your environment can play on your ability to get a good night's rest. And we'll finally end with how you can implement morning and evening rituals to have improved performance and sleep.
All right. So first of all, we're going to start with the question, which I think there's probably an obvious answer here. is that what behavior is linked to the following? So you can see the list is pretty extensive here. We have an increased risk of brain disease, increased cancer risk, increased Alzheimer's risk, body weight, risk of errors, risk of car accidents goes up, all-cause mortality goes up. And then on the right side of the screen, we have lots of things decrease: productivity, immunity, accuracy, likability. And unfortunately, likability, that means your coworkers, your colleagues, maybe even family may not like you as much. Decrease in muscle, natural killer T cells, and a decrease in overall lifespan. So let's expand on some of these. Honestly, this is just a short list right here. But let's expand on some of these. So first of all, we look at increase in Alzheimer's risk. There's actually a really famous, well-known sleep researcher, and he actually says now not just an increase in risk in Alzheimer's disease, but lack of sleep may actually cause Alzheimer's. That's a pretty bold statement, but based on a lot of the research that's been done, that's what he and some others have concluded. And how about the risk of car accidents? Now, that one's interesting. When we look at car accidents, certainly there's a high rate of car accidents if you're sleep deprived. Well, because you're not necessarily paying attention or not able to stay awake when you're driving. But more specifically, there's actually been some research around teenagers, and now car accidents are the number one cause of death in teenagers. And not just because of sleep deprivation, but just for other reasons as well. But interestingly, some researchers did a study where they tried to, or they gave people, they have the opportunity for a higher amount of sleep. And what they did was they actually had high school start 1 hour later. And what they did, now, when we go through puberty, our circadian rhythm shifts. So we're physiologically able to stay up later. Now, unfortunately, the schools still start at the same time, so we're staying up later, but teenagers don't necessarily get the sleep they need because then they have to wake up to go to school. So these researchers decided to have school start an hour later, and this is a group of seniors. So they were all driving, and then also we're taking the SATs. And they measured those two things. They measured car accidents, and they measured SAT scores in this group that, again, had school start an hour later. What they found after that year was that SAT scores increased by 212 points, and car accidents decreased by 72%, 7-2. That's pretty astounding, and the only thing they did was start school 1 hour later. So now that brings me to the question I asked at the start, or at the top of this slide: what behavior is linked to the following? Well, yeah, so it is a lack of sleep. Okay, I'm going to give that answer away. Probably doesn't come as a surprise. But then the question is, what does a lack of sleep look like? And now, even before answering that, I'm going to ask you to put this in the chat box. Let's see some of the answers here. Who knows what the average number of hours of sleep should be per night? So go ahead and put that in the chat box. Let's see some of the answers. You've probably heard this. You may be familiar with this. This may not come as a surprise, but I would love to see some of those answers in there, some of the guesses, and I'll certainly put the answer up there for you as well. What do we have? I see an 8. I see a 7 to 9. See some people putting lots of answers coming in all of a sudden. 8, 9, 7 to 8. So it looks like people pretty much have that answer, right? So the average is 8, and that is correct. So 7 to 9 hours is the recommendation. Obviously, 8 is the average there. So then the next question, I'm going to ask you to once again put this in the chat box. What do we think when we say what behavior is linked to the following? What amount of sleep does it require to then link to the following, to all of those things on this slide? How many hours a night would we guess it takes? Pause for a little second here as these answers come through. And I see some 6s, some 5s. Okay. I saw a few 4s in there. Okay, so a whole lot of answers. So Okay, sixes again. Well, the answer is 6 hours of sleep. So when we decrease our sleep by simply 1 hour, just one less than the recommendation, that is when we start to have some of these risks up on the screen. Now, I don't want to leave the screen just yet because I want to expand on some of these here, aside from what I just did with the car accident. So what about decreased immunity? Certainly a hot topic right now, of course, with everything going on, and now certainly as we go into cold and flu season on top of COVID. Well, decreased immunity, interestingly, when we sleep less, our immunity is lower. And more specifically, some researchers several years ago now, there was a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And what they found was when people had less than 6 hours of sleep a night, they were four times likely to develop a cold. So again, that increases the risk significantly when we just look at that little bit lower amount of sleep. And more specifically, as of course there's a big recommendation now and push to get your flu shots. Well, when we sleep less, the days leading up to our flu shots, that actually significantly decreases our antibody response. And again, very well-known researcher, sleep researcher said it almost, if you don't sleep enough leading up to the days before your flu shot, it almost makes that flu shot completely useless because that decrease in antibody response. So we start to look at the challenges with not sleeping enough. And again, I keep coming back to this because it's only 6 hours or less a night. Now, the one I didn't mention is at the bottom here that's highlighted, a 200% increase risk in heart attack or stroke. Well, this is actually very timely because you may not be aware, or maybe you are, but this weekend, we're actually setting the clocks back 1 hour. Okay, so we're falling back this weekend. And the reason this is timely is because when we set our clocks back 1 hour, there's an uptick in heart attacks by 21% the following day. So setting them back 1 hour, we have a decrease in heart attacks by 21% the following day. In the spring, now we're not quite there yet, but in the spring, that reverses. So it actually is an increase in heart attack. So again, we are setting the clocks back 1 hour this weekend. I'm not sure anyone wants to set the clocks back and have an extra hour of 2020, but we're there this weekend, and at least you'll have a decrease in heart attack risk.
All right. So when we're thinking about these behaviors and the fact that, we have times in our life where maybe we're getting less than 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, sometimes that is seasonally, right? Sometimes it is the season of life that we find ourselves in. Perhaps you have young children or newborn and your sleep is interrupted. Perhaps you have disease or illness, which really is making it difficult to sleep well at night. But I also want to talk about the understanding of the fact that sometimes we are the reason we're not getting enough sleep. We begin to believe that there's something about our life that just really prevents that from being a possibility, or perhaps it's just the lifestyle habits that we've developed. And so when we're thinking about this, I want us to just all take a moment and kind of stop and think, what is the story that we have around sleep? I described mine and said that, for the longest time, I just said, all I need is 5 hours. And I convinced myself of that truth, right? I made it true for myself, even though it truly wasn't the case. So I want you to stop and think and ask yourself, what is the average amount of sleep that I get normally? To really, look over the past, say, 3 months or so, how much sleep do I typically get most nights? So you have that one number in your head. And then I want you to just examine this past week. Ask yourself, what was the least amount of sleep that I got in the past 7 days? And so we're seeing, in any given night, how negotiable is that number? So you're going to have one number, the average amount you normally get. What was the least amount you got in the past week? And then I'd be just curious if you would share the difference. So what is the difference between those two numbers? Between the average amount you typically get and in the past week, what was the least amount of sleep that you got? So if you want to just kind of fill those in the chat box. All right, I see 2. And some of you are saying that you get 7 to 8 typically, but what we're really looking for here is the difference. How much were you, did you negotiate away in the past week? 3, 1 hour, 2 to 3. Okay, so some of us are really good about being consistent with the amount of sleep that we get. And then some of us, sometimes just have to negotiate it away. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I want to make sure that sleep is really a non-negotiable when it comes to taking care of ourselves and our health. And this understanding that, for many people, sleep might be the plus or minus 8 hours that they have to work with to get more done in the day, to be more productive, to meet deadlines. And so if that's the case, then we really have to take that back, because it can become a very slippery slope of just giving away sleep. So before we know it, our average is 6, and then we begin to experience the health consequences of that choice. So let's talk about what happens when we sleep, because I think it's a really important understanding to understand what we're missing out on. So typically when we go to bed at night, our body is going to move through different stages of sleep. And so you see stages 1 through 3. Those are typically classified as non-REM sleep. And then we have REM sleep, which refers to rapid eye movement sleep. So typically in any given night, we will cycle through each of these different stages. So you see here, the ones in orange are stage 1 sleep. Now this is when we're first starting to fall asleep at night. This is maybe the first 10%, or it makes up about 10% of your total sleep time. And so in this stage, you're just beginning to fall asleep. This might be when you're, resting comfortably in bed, and all of a sudden you'll feel your muscle twitch, or you start to doze off and it feels like you're falling, and you kind of wake yourself back up. But our eye movement begins to slow down, and we're starting to kind of become relaxed. If I called you on the phone during this stage, you would wake up right away and be able to have a conversation with me, and I probably couldn't even detect that you were beginning to fall asleep. Then we move into stage 2, which is classified as light sleep as well. But this stage of light sleep really makes up about 50% of our total sleep time. This is when our body prepares to get into more deep and restorative rest. So our heart rate begins to regulate, our breathing regulates, we begin to take deeper breaths and more slowly. Our body temperature drops. We begin to have slower brain waves, and this is when our eye movement stops. So this is making up about 50%, but essentially it is our body's preparedness to get into that deep sleep. And that really is stage 3. So stage 3 sleep is what we're seeing in the blue, and this is deep sleep. Now, if you've ever heard somebody describe sleep in 5 stages, it's because stage 3 technically has 2 stages, but because it's all the same thing, it's all deep sleep, we tend to classify it together. So in deep sleep, this is our rest and restoration, like our body's restoration and regeneration occurs here. Our blood pressure drops, our muscles relax. This is where we can expect that we're going to see cellular regeneration and repair, where our immune system becomes improved during this stage. And this is a pretty metabolically active stage because we're using the hormones that our body releases to really use it for that cellular repair and regeneration. I like to refer to deep sleep, which is stage 3, as like pure money, right? Like this is the stuff of gold. And if you've ever woken up in the morning and you just felt sore or achy, maybe you're working out and you don't feel like you have any degree of recovery, or it just feels like your body feels beaten up, odds are you probably did not get enough of this deep restorative sleep. Now, stage 3 sleep tends to decrease as we get older. We have less of it. And, researchers are trying to decide, is that the chicken or the egg? Are we aging because we're getting less of this deep restorative sleep, or is that maybe a function of aging? And then we move into REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep. Now, during this stage, this is when your brain is extremely active. It is dreaming, and it really is a place of important memory acquisition and learning and skill acquisition. So in REM sleep, this is when we are dreaming, but we're also doing a lot of emotional processing. This is when our brain is taking all of our memories and experiences throughout the day and kind of filing things away, deciding what to keep, what to lose, and so forth. So if you've ever had that situation where you woke up in the morning and you have this sort of aha moment, odds are it occurred during REM sleep because your brain is taking all the information. So it might take that meeting that you had a week ago and connect it to the article you read, today, or maybe something you heard on the news or the radio, and put those pieces of the puzzle together to help your understanding grow. We also know for those who are learning a new skill or a hobby or a language, that skill acquisition is sort of enhanced during REM sleep. Essentially, your brain is laying down new neural pathways during this time to help further that skill along. So what's interesting is because our brain is so active, our body actually goes into a state of paralysis. Now, it does this because if we were acting out our dreams by running and chasing and jumping and so forth, we would constantly be waking up during this state. So the body protects the state by essentially paralyzing the body and letting the mind do its work. Now, when we go through these stages, we go through them multiple times each night. So essentially, you move from stage 1, 2, 3 into rapid eye movement sleep every single night. And we typically cycle through about 4 to 5 times. Now, for the most part, most of those cycles are going to last about 90 minutes. Maybe the first one lasts about 2 hours. And what's interesting is that we spend longer amounts of time in stage 3 sleep, in that deep sleep, earlier in the evening. So between the hours of about 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., when our hormones are at their greatest level, this is when we're spending greater amounts in deep sleep. And then toward the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., we're spending longer and longer periods in REM sleep, and that stage 3 sleep tends to shorten. This is why it's really important to pay attention not only to the quantity of sleep, but the hours that you're sleeping. Because if we want to get that deep restorative rest and regeneration, then we want to really optimize the time that we're going to bed so that we can get that hormonal release and use it for the work that our body needs. So typically during the course of the night, if we wake up many times, we're going to likely wake up in stage 1. So as we're transitioning from REM sleep into stage 1 sleep, because again, we go back into that light stage, and it's easy for us to wake up. Perhaps if we hear a loud sound or there's a lot of noise or light in the room, this is likely when that's going to happen. Of course, there are lots of things that we can do to really prevent our body from moving into stage 3 or even REM sleep, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But if you've ever been in bed and had maybe a full night's sleep, 8 hours in your bed, but it was a miserable experience, you were tossing and turning all night long, you kept on waking up, you couldn't wait for it to be morning just for the night to be over, odds are nights like that, you're likely bouncing back and forth between stages 1 and 2. And so we're really not giving our body the rest it needs. So when we're thinking about those stages of sleep, really we want to give our bodies the optimal opportunity to go through all those cycles 4 to 5 times a night and really maximize what's happening within those cycles while we're sleeping. All right, so those are the things that happen when we're sleeping, right? They're really important things that we need to consider and why we really want to get a good night's sleep. A lot of times, though, we get in our own way, right? I mentioned that there are things that we can choose and behaviors and activities that we do during the course of the day that actually make it really difficult to fall into the sleep that we need. And so, this idea of low battery, what do we do when we experience low battery? For many of us, if we see this on a device, the first thing we are doing is running to find a charger, right? We will borrow, we will beg, we will steal one if we need to, but we will absolutely recharge that battery. The challenge, however, is that we don't necessarily have that same response when we feel that physically. In many ways, we just ignore it. It's like the story I mentioned, that for years, I just assumed I only needed 5 hours of sleep because I conditioned myself to wake up at the same time every day, and I woke up easily. However, the rest of the day, I was not experiencing optimal form. And as much as I bragged about the fact that I didn't need 5 hours of sleep, Chris Mohr was always giving me side eye during the course of the day, arguing with my boast that that's all it took. And so this idea of why we don't get the rest that we need, well, we have a story. And I don't know what your story is. For many years, I thought fitness was going to be the thing that protected me and allowed me to get less rest. And I also told myself that, at the time I was in academics. I was teaching college classes, and, I just had a demanding schedule, and so I just didn't have the time for it. But a lot of times we create a narrative around why we can't get the rest that we need, and instead tell ourselves that no one in our position would be able to get that rest, no one could carve out that amount of time. And so we create a narrative that actually supports not getting enough sleep. And then we start to turn to devices and things that make it harder and harder to get the rest that we need. So we create this vicious cycle. So when we're talking about what's your story, as we go through these next couple of slides, what I really want you to examine is, what are you telling yourself about why or why not you would change those things? Like, what about those things make it very difficult to adjust and change within your schedule? And then really ask yourself, is that true?
All right. So now let's actually start to look at, and Kara brings up, what's your story? What is your story around some of these daily behaviors? Now, seen lots of questions come through around, what is the application of this? How can I start to implement some of this information? Or how are some of these things, devices, technology, and so on affecting sleep? So let's expand on some of that and actually talk about some of the research recommendations around some of these sleep hygiene practices. So first of all, we'll start with technology. And technology we'll define as any kind of technology: computer, iPad, phone, TV, whatever it may be. Now, there's specific recommendations around using technology. And very basic rule of thumb is that, very simply, if it doesn't have a heartbeat, whether that's another human or a four-legged creature, it shouldn't be in your bed. And more specifically than that, the recommendation around technology is ideally to not use it. And again, I listed what technology is, but not use it within 60 minutes of going to bed. Now, some data has even suggested up to 2 hours, but we'll try to be a little bit more kind and say at least 1 hour before bed, not using any type of technology. Now, why is that? Because that might seem a little bit harsh if your normal routine is going to bed with a phone in hand and then suddenly you fall asleep until the phone drops out of your hand and hits you on the forehead. So what is the reason for this? Well, technology emits blue light. And again, that's any type of electronic device emits blue light. And what that does is that impacts our ability to start to regulate or secrete melatonin as it should be. So not to get into a lot of those details today, but melatonin throughout the day fluctuates in all of us throughout the day and slowly starts to increase in the evening when we're looking to, and it starts to get us sleepy. Well, technology almost impacts that, or it doesn't secrete normally. So if we're looking at our devices, then unfortunately our melatonin is not secreted sufficiently and efficiently, and it starts to actually be pushed a little bit later in the evening. So even if you can fall asleep with the TV on, or you could look at your phone and immediately put it down, and your eyes can be shut, and you're dead asleep within seconds. That latency is nothing. Well, unfortunately, the quality of the sleep, the stages Kara just talked about, are going to be impacted. And there's actually a term they're now using called a melatonin hangover, meaning you wake up the next day, you feel still pretty groggy, even if you got the right quantity of sleep, because possibly your hormonal shifts were not proper, and it could be impacted by the technology that you use. So the other problem with that is, simply sometimes when we're looking at technology, it could be mindless, like social media, for example, or TV, but so a lot of times it's work-related. We talk to a lot of clients who are working, trying to get those last emails out, trying to get those last reports out, and your mind is working, your mind is racing. Well, bedtime is when your mind should be shutting down. So if your mind is running on full blast and you're trying to shut it down, unfortunately, it's going to start to impact the quality of your sleep. Now, I know there are some blue light blockers you can use, whether it's on your device, you can use that on your phone, or the glasses you can wear. The data's, I haven't seen a lot of data on that. They do show promise, so I think it's better than nothing. We would suggest that as a better alternative than not using them. However, if we're still doing work, if our mind's still racing. You know, certainly if you're watching the news in the evening, sometimes TV doesn't leave us with the best taste in our mouth, and that can get us amped up. That can still not allow us to get a quality sleep. So, you know, what we need to think about, if I said that hour, that you heard that number, that 60 minutes of technology, and you started to bristle at that, can we at least do 15 minutes? Let's start to at least wind it down 15 minutes before bed. And maybe we can start to build from there, because we know that the small changes equal big results over time. So can we do that 15 minutes? And then the question is, if that was your normal go-to habit, the technology immediately right up until your eyes shut, well, then what is that going to be replaced with? So we need to think about some other alternatives. Maybe it's if you share your bed with somebody, a conversation with a partner. Maybe it's simply petting your pet if you sleep with a dog is in your bed, or a cat. Or a gratitude journal. There's lots of opportunities, but we need to fill that space with something else. Now, another daily hygiene tip that might affect people is this beautiful cup of coffee here. And I say beautiful cup of coffee because I know Kara and I are both lovers of a good, high-quality cup of coffee. The key is, when is that caffeine shut off during the day? Now, of course, coffee isn't the only source of caffeine. There's a lot of sources. Coffee is probably, the most widely used drug in the world, caffeine. But of course, tea or chocolate, or there's other sources as well. So the challenge with caffeine is not that we use it, but it's when we stop using it. And most recommendations here are ideally cutting off caffeine by about noon during the day. Now, I've seen some recommendations maybe going up to 2 p.m. at the latest, but here's the challenge with caffeine. Caffeine has it's a half-life, and that half-life means that, it's hanging out, half the dose is hanging out in your body and sticking with you for about 6 to 8 hours after you consume it. So the challenge with that is maybe you're not going to bed. I said 12 o'clock. You might not be going to bed at 6 p.m. or even 8 p.m., but if you have caffeine consistently throughout the day, that essentially turns into compounding effect. So compounding interest in finances is great. We love that. But from a caffeine standpoint, unfortunately, when caffeine continues to add up throughout the day, you might be trying to shut it down in the evening, and now you still have some caffeine in your system. This actually reminds me of a story. I was giving a talk years ago now, and this one particular woman said that, she was telling me that she was pretty groggy throughout the day, and she was trying to figure out what it was. She traveled Monday through Friday to the same location all the time, so she knew that location just like her own home. In the lobby of the hotel where she stayed was a popular coffee shop, and she said she would wake up in the morning. Her go-to routine was to walk downstairs, get a venti coffee, which is the largest that they offer. She would drink that while getting ready. On the way to the office, she would get another one on the way as she was walking to the office. So she already had 2 of them, and she said it was by 8:30 at the latest. And then, in her definition, she said the only liquid she consumed all day was caffeine. So she continued that habit throughout the day, so much so that she actually would go to bed. She would get a coffee on the way back into her hotel, and she went to bed with a coffee on her nightstand as well. Now, again, that might be a little extreme in terms of the caffeine intake, and that's a whole nother discussion in terms of the health benefits or concerns with that much caffeine. But it's not surprising that she was not feeling well rested. And she said, but I fall asleep so easily in the evening. But unfortunately, if you're consuming that much caffeine and you're still falling asleep that easily, that shows that there's some kind of sleep challenges going on. So we need to think about, how can we reduce our intake? Again, and this is any kind of caffeine, whether it's chocolate or tea or other sources. Again, coffee is an easy one to pick on, but there's a variety of sources of caffeine out there. So just being aware of what you're consuming. And again, the general recommendation is cutting it off by about noon, 2 o'clock at the absolute latest, because we want to make sure, ideally, it's out of our system when it's time to shut it down and go to bed. All right, so we see a beautiful glass of red wine being poured here, and I do not want to sound like the fun sponge, but I guess I'm going to take that role right now with this next recommendation. So if you do drink caffeine, the recommendation around caffeine is to stop drinking it a last call within 2 hours of bedtime. So 2 hours of bedtime, and that is because caffeine it does knock you out. It is a sedative, but that is different than helping you fall asleep. Okay, so when we think about this, alcohol it actually affects your ability to go through those stages of sleep that Kara talked about earlier. It will absolutely cause you to wake up consistently throughout the evening, even if you don't realize that you're waking up. Yes, you might actually wake up to go to the bathroom because alcohol is a diuretic, but even outside of that, you may actually you'll be interrupted in your sleep when alcohol is in your system. So the recommendation is 2 hours before bedtime, having your last call if you do drink alcohol. If you could do it earlier than that, great. I don't know that we're necessarily recommending day drinking, but maybe that's the solution here. Don't take notes on that. I'm just kidding. But alcohol, again, you have to be wary of how much you're drinking, and then obviously the hours you're drinking it as well, because that is going to impact sleep as well. So again, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you just want to be wary of the frequency and then the quantity and then proximity to bed as well. The next piece of environmental sleep hygiene advice is around the general environment of what your bedroom looks like or feels like, and that's the light, that is the temperature, and that is also the noise in your bedroom. So from a light perspective, this little lamp here would be great if you're just simply reading a book in the evening or writing down in a journal. But in general, they recommend if you can see your hand in front of your face, it is too bright in your room. So what does that mean for you? Does that mean maybe putting in room darkening shades? I know we've done that. Or if it's comfortable for you, sleeping with an eye mask. I know when I travel, I certainly do that because I can't always control my environment. And to be honest, both of us, when we did travel, again, that seems like a lifetime ago, we actually travel with clothespins in our bags so we can close the blinds or the shades in the hotel rooms, because you never know what beam of light is going to be shining through those shades. So making it dark, making it cool as well. And when I say making it cool, there's actually a specific recommendation for the temperature of your bedroom, and that is 62 to 68 degrees. So normally when we're giving talks and if there happens to be couples in the room, we often see one another give side eye because there's usually a disagreement on what that temperature should be. But cooler temperatures seem to allow you to get into better stages of sleep and go through the stages of sleep Kara talked about more efficiently. So colder temperatures, darker room, and then last but not least is sound. And now, depending where you live, you want to basically make the room consistent with a sound. So if you live in a big city like a New York or an LA or something like that, it's certainly going to be louder than if you're living in the suburbs somewhere. But as long as that noise is fairly consistent, and maybe that means a sound machine for you, so it just gives a basic white noise. But those are the three general factors when we think about environment, when we think about how we're trying to control the environment to get the best night of sleep that we can. So in other words, we're trying to build a quality sleep sanctuary. That bedroom should be this sanctuary because we spend ideally about a third of our lives in the bedroom, right? And when we start to look at what an impact it has on well-being and our health and our energy and so on, there's really nothing more important than the quality of our sleep. Now, I gave you lots of different basic sleep hygiene strategies around caffeine and alcohol and environment, but the most important thing that sleep researchers say you can do around sleep is to be consistent. That is to go to bed and wake up at the same time every single day, 7 days a week. So that doesn't mean Monday through Friday, having a consistent, 8 hours a night, and then staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning at, Friday night, Saturday night, and then trying to make up for it on Sunday. Again, I used the term melatonin hangover earlier. Well, essentially, when we look at that and we have that same effect if we stay up really late in the evening on the weekend, well, it's almost like it's like time travel, essentially. You go time travel on Friday and Saturday night, you're getting that inconsistent sleep patterns. Well, then you're sleep deprived come Monday morning. And unfortunately, then we start to have a big effect on the quality of our sleep, and you can't really catch up. So that's why we want to be consistent. Consistent Monday through Sunday, 7 days a week, having the same patterns that we do to make sure we get the quality sleep that we need.
And I think what's so fascinating is that COVID has changed that for many of us, right? We don't have the opportunities to have quite the same social life that we did before the pandemic began. And research has found that people are getting more sleep because they don't have as many opportunities to be out late at night, or maybe not as much to do in their schedule. And so in that respect, quantity of sleep is actually increasing. However, it's becoming more disruptive, right? I mentioned the fact that when we're in REM sleep, that tends to be a place of emotional processing. A lot of us are processing a lot of emotions during this time. And of course, that's leading to more vivid dreams. We're waking up more frequently. Perhaps we're feeling a little more uncertain and fearful. And so all of that is impacting our ability to get a good night's rest. So when we're thinking about this, it's quantity and quality. And there are things that we can do within our lifestyle to really support getting good quality of sleep. And that first recommendation I want to make is to create some white space in your day. So we have a picture of a woman reading a book with probably the most adorable puppy I've ever seen right there. But if you're thinking about a book, about the pages of a book, every book, an article, and anything we might be reading would have white space. And that white space helps us to draw attention to the words, right? It helps us to be able to understand what we're reading, to process it, to give attention to the things in an easy to understand manner, and helps to pace us. Well, think about the white space in your own life. It does the exact same thing, right? It begins to help us identify what's important, what's not, what are the things that matter most. And quite honestly, because we have so much technology at our fingertips, because we are so globally connected 24/7, it really is possible that we can constantly be consuming something, be watching something or reading or, interacting with somebody all the time. And that leaves us with little room in our life to stop and realign and see what matters most. So this idea of creating white space in your day is, how do we find a buffer between our life or work? And right now, many people are working from home, so there's not much room, right? It's all in one spot. And so it's easy to sort of always think that every hour at this point could be work hours if you're working from home. But when we don't create that space in our day, we are really essentially running our life margin to margin, end to end in that page. And it really doesn't leave us with the opportunity to think about how we want to direct our time and what's most important. So we have some recommendations here for ways that we can improve our sleep, and they literally begin the moment you wake up. If you want to get a better night's sleep tonight, it starts with how you treat the day from the moment you open your eyes. And so this idea and understanding of creating a morning routine. Is there something that you can do within that first hour of the morning to give yourself that white space that you need and to give yourself the time that you need in order to direct your day? Now, what's interesting is that research has found that the choices that we make in that first hour of the day make a difference. They found that actually, in a study done of 1,000 people, they found that those who were getting up first thing in the morning and have a consistent routine actually had greater financial benefits, and on average earned about $12,500 more per year by simply having a morning routine in place. Now, in that study, they found that the majority of those people would either be exercising, they might be having a meditation practice where they might meditate first thing in the morning, so they would journal, or maybe even prepare for the day by preparing their lunch, etc. But this idea of the morning routine is for you to decide What allows you to step into your life and make you the highest priority? Rather than just turning off the alarm on your phone, having essentially email and text notifications drag you out of bed, and before you realize it, you're already reacting, you're responding, in your mind to all the things that are waiting for you, and it creates a lot of anxiety and urgency where maybe none is necessary. So this idea of thinking about how we're going to make ourselves the highest priority, it could be simply setting an intention for the day. How do you want to show up? What are those things that, you want to do that day? Do you want to be clear? Do you want to be patient? Do you want to be kind? Do you have a big project that you'd like to make some progress on? Can you visualize your day? Can you mentally walk through your day and identify those things that might be most problematic or where you're going to need to be most patient? Thinking about the day ahead. For some people, it might just be sitting in quiet. I know for me personally, I'm an introvert, and having my family constantly around has been a challenge the last 6 months. And as much as I love them, I would like them to go away sometimes. And I'm glad that Chris is laughing because that might be a problem. But this, so for me, I get up first thing in the morning. I try and wake up before anyone else, and then I enjoy a cup of coffee in solitude and plan my day. But maybe it is exercise or something else altogether. Maybe it could be prayer, or it could be a hobby that you want to devote, or you like yoga or stretching. There's so many things that we could do to prioritize ourselves first thing in the morning. And then let's flip that and do the same thing at night. We mentioned the fact that, using up technology up until the time you go to bed can be problematic. So what could you create if you took that time and brought it back on yourself? Maybe you could assess where you are, what matters most, how have your values shifted, what do you need to realign with? So often when we think about habits and behavior, it becomes a slippery slope of just, oh, I did this yesterday, so I'll do it again, right? And before we realize it, we've drastically changed our behaviors, and we had no idea it was happening because it was always just a small little directional change from the day before. So if we have that opportunity before bed to realign to what matters most, to make sure that we're showing up and putting our time with the things that we truly value, that can be a difference maker in how we feel in our lives. And so maybe at night you could journal about the wins of the day. Perhaps you could, document what you're struggling with, what seems to be problematic, what keeps showing up. Simple act of practicing and using a gratitude journal can make a difference. When our oldest daughter was a baby, she did not sleep through the night. And, there was always like something a little off in my eyes, I think, when you interacted with me, because I was always so sleep deprived. So a friend had recommended starting a gratitude journal. And she said, just simply keep track of the things that are going well. And I think the first probably 60 pages of that gratitude journal I kept during that time were like an ode to coffee because it was the thing keeping me going, right? So for those of you who are in that season of your life, we recognize that sometimes we can't always fix everything. We can't change somebody else's sleeping behavior that we're responsible for taking care of and so forth. So, where can we find the joy and where can we recognize that this is temporary and it won't last forever? How do we find the direction that we want to head in and so forth? These are all opportunities of things that we can do in that last hour before bed that have nothing to do with technology, and it's about an investment in ourselves. And so this last slide is really for you to kind of come to this place of saying, all right, what matters most? And how can I create some non-negotiables for myself, especially when it comes around sleep? Because the thing is, if we don't protect something, if we don't say, you know what, the world's not going to get this, it will try and take it. And you know this from people, wanting your time and needing you in different ways. And if you're one of the people pleaser, you're somebody who really likes to help others, it can be so easy to just say, yes, I'm going to do that. And then we compromise the things that allow us to be our best, to show up as our best each and every day. And so this understanding of how do we protect what we need? What is your non-negotiable for sleep? How many hours do you absolutely need? And then what are you going to do to protect that? Or does it mean that you set a bedtime alarm so that you are reminding yourself, even though you have a habit of sitting on the couch and allowing yourself to watch lots of television in the evening, are you going to remind yourself that you want to make sleep a priority and you're going to use that as an opportunity to go to bed? So this understanding of how will I protect that and what will I do? Maybe I need to set some boundaries with other people to let them know that this matters to me. Maybe I need to be clear about what that looks like. So for me, I've set a non-negotiable of I get at least 7 hours of sleep a night. Now, of course, I can't always control things, right? You are on a flight, you're traveling, you have things come up, you're sick, something happens. Yes, of course, you might not always be able to attain that perfectly. But it's the understanding that if I work to protect it, it will happen more often than not, and then I will allow myself to step into the best vision of myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that non-negotiable part is so important. And I know for us, we've certainly prioritized that with both ourselves, with our kids, and trying to set those routines and habits in early is particularly important. Now, we're going to transition to do some questions in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to share, we have some more information about sleep. And we've loved this topic. We've talked all over the world, which is great about this important topic. And certainly there's been tons and tons of questions coming in, which we will certainly get to. But wanted to also, there's a link here. If you want to share your email with us, we will answer the questions that we'll certainly have time for today, and maybe not all of them, but we'll gladly share that with you. So if you follow this link and enter your email in, you'll get a couple videos from us of answering some of the questions that I see came through about some of the foods that may help you sleep better and so on. But go ahead and do that. And then I would also love to take some questions. Let me read the link because I know it might be hard to see with the blue on blue here. So the link is Mohr Results, which is our last name, MOHR, results.com/TD sleep, as in today's dietitian sleep. So if you go to that link, you enter your email in there. Once again, you'll get some videos from us with answering some of the questions that you've asked, and then we'll also send more information answering other questions that we may not have time to get to today. So that being said, Leslie, I'd love to turn it over to you, and we could take some of the questions that came through for what we have time for.
Absolutely. We have a ton of questions to get through, so I've kind of classified them in a few different topic areas. So we're going to start with a few general sleep questions. So Chris, a lot of questions on napping. How beneficial are naps? Can naps make up some of the 7 or 8 hours of recommended sleep that we might not get at night? Should you set an alarm for a nap or wake up on your own, let your body wake up for you? Lots of questions on naps. So talk to us more about that.
Okay, so naps are a wonderful thing. And so one of the things we have to best understand about naps is that essentially in your body you have something that's known as a sleep thermometer. And it's not its official title. Its official title is adenosine. And so as adenosine levels rise, you become sleepier during the course of the day. So the only way that we can drop down those adenosine levels is to actually sleep it off, right? So that reduces the adenosine, and so we feel less sleepy. Interestingly enough, caffeine is very similar and binds the adenosine site, so it can actually mask that sleepy feeling, which is why so many people turn to caffeine as their number one go-to source when they're feeling exhausted. So naps can be great because they can reduce that adenosine level and help us to feel refreshed. But there are a couple of recommendations around naps to really maximize this as a technique. Number one, you really want to keep your naps to under 30 minutes. 20 to 30 is that sweet spot for naps. And the reason for this is that that'll keep you in that light sleep, because if we start to head into stage 2 and 3 sleep, what'll end up happening is that you'll feel really groggy. Your body's going to want to go all the way through that cycle. So if you wake up somewhere in the middle of that stage 3 deep sleep, you're going to feel like you've been hit by a Mack truck, right? So you want to keep the nap short. It reduces the adenosine levels. You also want to keep the naps before about 2 p.m. So any later than that, and if you nap too close to bedtime, you end up reducing that adenosine levels too much, and you end up actually making it harder on yourself to fall asleep at night. So the key is to really keep the naps short, keep them sweet, before 2 p.m., and then make sure, even on weekends, when you might even have a lot more time and you really look forward to a leisurely, nice long nap, you want to avoid doing that because we want to keep that consistent sleep routine that we have, because that's the most important and beneficial thing for getting a good night's rest.
Perfect. All right. So next question in that same general sleep category, any suggestions for people who work swing shifts or the night shift? We've had a few people ask that question.
Yeah, this is another one that certainly comes up a lot. So, certainly, obviously, if that's your responsibility, we have to work night shifts. Obviously, you need to do that. So what's important is making sure that you are still consistent with your sleep. Now, it's not necessarily ideal, but still working around that shift, still trying to get the time that we talked about. Again, ideally that's 7 to 9 hours if you can, and at least being consistent. Remember I said that was the most important thing that seemed to impact sleep. Well, consistency matters here as well. So again, going back to those sleep hygiene practices I talked about, keeping it dark, quiet. Again, I know that's maybe more difficult if you're then sleeping during the day, but that may be worthwhile then to invest in room darkening shades or a sleep mask, even earplugs, so you can control the controllables as much as you can. But again, consistency is key. So making sure that you try to be consistent within that pattern of the evening shift work is important.
Perfect. All right, moving right along. What about melatonin before bed? A lot of people have asked about its effects. Is it beneficial? How much? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, this one comes up a lot. Obviously, I brought up the topic of melatonin as a whole, as a hormone that we all produce, and it fluctuates throughout the day. So the thought is our melatonin increases in the evening, and therefore we get sleepy. So what if I just take external exogenous sources of melatonin? Will that help me fall asleep more efficiently and also with a higher quality sleep? Now, the data is mixed on melatonin use as a supplement. There's some promising data, but to be honest, most of the data seems to be more promising if you're traveling across time zones than if you're just taking it on a consistent basis. Now, that being said, there doesn't seem to be a harm. So to me, I would say if the benefit outweighs the risk, even if it's a placebo effect, I'm not opposed to supplementing with melatonin for that effect. But physiologically, is it truly doing anything? The data, like I said, there are mixed. In terms of dosing, again, that seems to be around 1 to 3 milligrams per night, or per night, if you were going to supplement with it. Again, try it. If it seems to help you, there doesn't seem to be any deleterious effect, which is great. And then that brings up another question that a lot of people have asked. If I start taking melatonin supplement, will it affect my own production of melatonin? And no, that doesn't seem to be the case. So it won't necessarily make you stop producing it, and then if you stop taking the supplement, you won't produce it anymore. That doesn't seem to be the case.
All right. All right, we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit more about the technology. That prompted a lot of questions, Chris, when you were talking about blue lights and filters and things like that. So first off, any comments or recommendations on devices that measure sleep, Fitbit or apps of that sort?
Yeah, so I think all of those can be really helpful in terms of helping us to get a better understanding on our own sleep patterns. Of course, there's error with each of those. So essentially what you want to do is pick one and then use it consistently, because it will be able to detect change over time. So that if you're making decisions around your sleep, if you're making adjustments to what you're doing, that using that same tracking device will allow you to be able to pick that up and see what's working and what's not working for you. Do I think we should be living and dying by these and really, using them to determine how well we're rested and how we're feeling? Absolutely not. And I think that that's the downside of these, that a lot of times what we'll do is, and I've been guilty of this myself, that I wake up and I feel pretty good, and then I go ahead and look at my sleep tracker and it tells me that I should feel rotten. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe I do feel bad. Maybe I'm not rested. So these things, take them with a grain of salt. If you like to track things and you want to be objective, they can be really useful. They can help us better understand, how much time we're spending in bed, and then also the efficiency of what we're sleeping. So if you take your total amount of time awake in bed and subtract that from your total time in bed and divide that out, you can actually get a percentage. And so if your percentage is typically above 85%, then you're pretty efficient, which shows you that when you're sleeping in bed, you're pretty much asleep. And that's really what we're looking for there.
Perfect. Okay. Next one that I want to jump into is sleep with interruptions. So a couple questions, actually a handful of questions have come in about strategies for sleep for people with perimenopause or full-on menopause. There's a big problem with some clients that Treva was asking about specifically. So any thoughts or recommendations on dealing with perimenopause or menopause and sleep?
Yeah, and again, it's, we come back to one of these places where it's seasonal, and I hate to always say that for people who are really looking for solid advice that can help improve things, so that when I talk to parents of young children, when I talk to people who are in perimenopause or menopause, that we recognize that this is a season of life where you will be a little bit more disrupted in your sleep, that you will wake up more frequently with hot flashes and so forth. And so if you can, as best you can, control for those factors, really allowing yourself to, make sure that you've invested in some pajamas that have some wicking fabric to help, move sweat and heat away from the body, that if you can use a fan, that if you can adjust the temperature, and now there's so many different devices and technology has really met mattresses, it's met sheets and so forth to help us stay cooler in the evening. And then recognize that this is a period of time that won't last forever. I know many people might not find comfort in that, but sometimes that's what we have to offer.
Okay. And so this will be our last question, and it came up a bunch of times, and I know I love a little snack before I go to bed, but what does eating before bed do to your sleep? Does it impact any certain stage, or does it impact anything at all?
So one thing that with eating, I would say not eating a very large meal right before bed. Contrary to popular belief, the old traditional Thanksgiving meal, then you pass out. That not necessarily is a quality sleep there. So if you're physiologically hungry, a small snack might not be bad in terms of helping kind of take the edge off there. And in terms of, again, you don't want too much food, just a little bit to take the edge off. In the actual, the videos that I talked about earlier, and I'm going to give that website again because I saw some people saying the link didn't work. I actually talk about a few specific foods that may actually have a little bit of additive benefit, but I'm going to keep you all in suspense for that. What I will say is not eating too much. That is certainly one of the recommendations. But again, if you need to take the edge off, a little snack wouldn't be bad. Now, the website, for those who are still on, I gave it earlier. It is CAP specific. So it's Mohr Results, MOHR results.com / capital T, capital D, capital S, LEEP. So those three letters, TDS, are capitalized. The rest are lowercase. And I do have some information in there. A couple of the videos we have in there are about specific around foods to choose, foods to lose, and some others around building a sleep sanctuary. So you can get some of that information in there.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Chris. So we've come to the end of the hour and then some. Thank you guys for staying on if you're still listening. Hope the Q&A, at least we got some of the questions that you might have asked. And I just want to thank you, Chris and Kara, for sharing your expertise. This is a really important topic, especially with what's going on in the world and with daylight savings coming up this weekend. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks so much, everybody.
Instructions for credit claiming and downloading handouts should be up on your screen. You must complete a brief evaluation of the course in order to claim your credit and download your certificate. Registered dietitians should use code 175 when recording this activity in their professional development portfolio. If you are watching this webinar on our YouTube channel, please log into ce.todaysdietitian.com, click on the Webinars tab, and select this webinar in order to complete it for credit. If you are watching this webinar on our CE Learning Library website, click Next, or return to the course start page and select the evaluation step to complete this webinar for credit.